The gunshot slammed across the Wyoming plains, and for Grace Guthrie, it was the sound of her world ending. It was 1876. The man standing over her father's body wasn't just any man. He was Silas Vaughn, and he tucked his still-smoking pistol into his holster with the casual air of a man swatting a fly. "Your paw's debts are settled," Vaughn sneered, his voice like gravel and greed. "This land is mine now." His eyes, cold and hungry, raked over Grace. "You've got till sundown to clear out." He leaned in closer, the stench of whiskey on his breath. "Unless, of course, you want to work off the debt in another way." Grace's grief curdled into pure, hot rage. She spat right on his dusty boots. "I'd sooner die out there." Vaughn's face went dark. He wiped his boot on the dry grass. "That can be arranged, girl." He didn't want the farm, not really. He'd torn it apart for weeks, his men digging, searching. He wanted something her father had hidden, and he thought she knew where it was. She didn't. All she had was her father's old, weathered Bible, a handful of coins, and a promise she'd made to him just that morning. "Don't let him find it, Gracie. Whatever you do." Find what? He died before he could tell her. So she ran. The wind howled, tearing at her thin coat, a predator just like Vaughn. The lights of a town called Whispering Pines were a cruel mirage in the distance. As darkness swallowed the plains and the first wolf called to its pack, Grace knew two things for certain. Vaughn would send men after her, and she was running toward a town where she knew no one, with a secret she didn't even understand. From the seat of his lumber wagon, Isaac Calloway saw the figure staggering against the twilight. He wasn't just a carpenter. You don't survive Andersonville prison by knowing how to build a good cabinet. You survive by seeing things other people miss. And he saw trouble in that silhouette. He pulled his draft horse, Samson, to a halt. "Whoa, boy." His hand rested near the butt of the Colt Peacemaker, hidden under his coat. He'd come to Whispering Pines for a quiet life, to build things instead of breaking them. But the past had a long shadow, and the woman on the road looked like she was running from a shadow of her own. Grace heard the wagon wheels stop, and her heart hammered against her ribs. She ducked behind a scrub brush, her hand going to the small knife in her boot. Her father's last gift. "Evening, ma'am," a deep voice called out. It was calm, steady, not like Vaughn's men. "Long way from town to be on foot." She peered out. The man on the wagon had eyes the color of a coming storm, and hands that looked like they could calm a horse or snap a man's neck with equal ease. A faded Stetson was pulled low, hiding his face in shadow. But it was the scar, a thin white line cutting through his right eyebrow, that made her breath catch. She'd seen a drawing of a man with a scar just like that, in her father's journal. "I'm headed to town," she said, her voice tight. "I'll manage." The man studied her, his gaze missing nothing, the tear tracks on her face, the way her hand was hidden, the bulge of the old Bible in her satchel. "Night's falling fast," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Wolves have been getting bold. I'm Isaac Calloway. Folks call me Ike. I'm heading to Whispering Pines. It'd be no trouble to give you a ride." Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She stepped out, nodding. "Grace Guthrie." He extended a hand. His grip was solid, warm, but as he pulled her up onto the wagon seat, she felt the hard muscle beneath his shirt. This was not just a carpenter. He smelled of sawdust, leather, and something else. Gunpowder. "Appreciate the kindness, Mr. Calloway," she said, keeping a careful distance. "But don't mistake it for weakness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never occurred to me, Miss Guthrie." He clicked the reins. "What brings you out here alone?" "My father was killed this morning," she said, the words flat and dead. "Silas Vaughn took our farm." Ike's hands tightened on the leather reins. The name Vaughn dropped into the air between them like a stone. Vaughn, he said, and the way he said it wasn't with surprise. It was with recognition, a dark, simmering recognition. I'm sorry about your father. The simple words broke through her defenses. A single tear rolled down her cheek. They rode in silence. The wagon creaked. Samson's hooves kept a steady rhythm. But the quiet was electric. She was a woman running from a killer. And she'd just climbed into a wagon with a man who was far more than he seemed, a man from her dead father's past. The lights of Whispering Pines finally grew closer. It wasn't much more than a single dusty street, but to Grace it was a sanctuary, or a trap. Ike didn't take her to the hotel or the boarding house. He pulled the wagon up in front of a two-story building with a sign that read, Calloway Carpentry and Construction. Got a room upstairs, he said, his voice casual, but his eyes were watching her reaction. It's clean and warm. You can stay the night. Figure things out in the morning. Her guard shot up. The boarding house will be fine. The door locks from the inside, he said, cutting her off, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. No one will know you're here. Vaughn's men will check the public places first. He was right, and that scared her more than anything. How did he know Vaughn so well? The genuine concern in his face warred with the alarm bells screaming in her head. She was exhausted, cold, and terrified. One night, she agreed, and I'll pay. He led her into the workshop. The smell of fresh-cut pine was calming. Tools hung in perfect order on the walls. It was the space of a meticulous man, a disciplined man. A narrow staircase led to a small room. It was sparse but spotless. A bed, a washstand, a chair. Water in the pitcher, he said, placing a lantern on the table. The light cast his face in flickering shadows, making that scar seem deeper. I'll be down in the shop. Yell if you need anything. After he left, Grace didn't cry. She wedged the chair under the doorknob. She took out her father's Bible, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. Don't let him find it, Gracie. She opened it, flipping through the familiar pages. Psalms, Proverbs. Nothing. But then she felt it. Near the back, in the book of Revelation. A page that was thicker than the others. 2 pages, carefully glued together at the edges. Her heart hammered. With trembling fingers, she used the tip of her knife to carefully slit the pages apart. Inside, it wasn't a map. It wasn't a deed. It was a list of names. And next to each name, a date, a location, and a number. Her father's name was there. So was Isaac Calloway's. And at the bottom of the page, a single chilling sentence was scrawled in her father's hand. Vaughn is not his real name. He is the last of the Black Creek gang. He's hunting us. All of us. Grace's blood ran cold. Ike wasn't a kind stranger. He was one of them. One of the men on the list. And Vaughn wasn't just a greedy rancher. He was a killer, methodically hunting down the people on this list. She wasn't running from a land dispute. She had stumbled into the middle of a war, and the man sleeping downstairs was not her savior. He was a target, and now so was she. The knock on her door came before sunrise. Miss Guthrie, Ike's voice. Grace hadn't slept. She'd spent the night staring at the list, the names burning into her memory. She'd hidden the Bible back in her satchel, the secret now a physical weight. She opened the door to find him holding a basket. Brought breakfast, he said. The smell of coffee and biscuits was a strange comfort in a world that had just tilted on its axis. I can't stay, she said, her voice brittle. I have to leave, now. Ike's calm expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. Running where? Vaughn's men are already in town. They were at the saloon late last night asking about a girl with auburn hair. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. He knew. Of course he knew. I won't bring trouble on you, she said, testing him. The trouble is already here, he replied, his gaze intense. and it's been coming for a long time. There it was, an admission. I have a proposition for you, he said, changing tactics. He gestured to the bustling workshop below. I need an assistant to keep the books, handle supplies. It pays a wage, room and board included. It's a way to stay hidden in plain sight. Why? Why would he do this? To protect her, or to keep her, and the list he must know she had, close? Why me? She asked, her voice a whisper. Something flickered in his stormy eyes, a deep, old pain. Because your father and we had an understanding. He was a good man. He knew her father. The list wasn't a coincidence. Nothing was. What understanding? An agreement, Ike said, his jaw tight, that if anything happened to one of us, the other would look out for our own. Silas Vaughn broke that agreement a long time ago. So he wasn't her enemy. He was her ally. Maybe. Trust was a fire-gutted ruin in her soul, but what choice did she have? Out there alone she was prey. Here, with him, she might be a pawn in his game, but at least she had a piece on the board. I pay rent for the room, she said, her voice firm, and I'm an employee, nothing more. A slow grin spread across Ike's face, reaching his eyes for the first time. Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Calloway Carpentry. Their days settled into a strange rhythm. Grace threw herself into the work, her mind sharp and focused. She organized his chaotic ledgers, streamlined his orders, and discovered a surprising talent for numbers. It was a shield against the fear that gnawed at her every night. She watched Ike. She watched him work wood with a surgeon's precision. She watched him interact with the townsfolk, his words few but his presence solid and respected. But she also saw him in the quiet moments, cleaning his colt with practiced efficiency, standing at the window late at night watching the street. His body was always coiled, ready, a predator at rest. He was teaching her, too, not just about carpentry, but about survival. Always know your exits, he'd say, seemingly talking about the workshop layout. Pay attention to details, a new horse, a stranger asking questions. Nothing is random. He was training her. 2 weeks after she arrived, the bell on the shop door jangled violently. Two of Vaughn's men stepped inside. They were big, ugly, and smelled of cheap whiskey and menace. Well, looky here, the taller one drawled, his eyes crawling over Grace. The little bird found a new cage. Grace didn't flinch. She placed her hand on a heavy wooden mallet. This is a private business. State your purpose or get out. The second man chuckled, a nasty, wet sound. Mr. Vaughn just wants to send his regards. He's a patient man, but his patience is wearing thin. He wants what your daddy owed him. My father owed him nothing, Grace said, her voice ice. He owed him a map, the man sneered, his voice dropping low. And Mr. Vaughn thinks he might have passed it on to you. Tucked inside that pretty little Bible of yours, maybe. Her blood froze. They knew. Before she could react, Ike emerged from the back room. He wasn't holding a tool. He was holding a shotgun, and it was aimed dead center at the first man's chest. She told you to get out. Ike's voice was dangerously calm. I won't ask twice. The men tensed, their hands hovering near their pistols. This ain't your fight, Calloway, the tall one snarled. You're in my shop, Ike replied, his thumb clicking back the hammer on the shotgun. The sound was deafening in the small space. Threatening my employee. That makes it my fight. The men saw the look in Ike's eyes. It wasn't the look of a carpenter. It was the look of a man who had sent souls to their maker before and wouldn't lose a night's sleep over doing it again. They backed out of the shop, their bravado gone. This ain't over, one of them yelled from the street. Ike kept the shotgun raised until they were gone. Then he lowered it, breaking it open to remove the shells. Grace was trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, lethal intensity she had just witnessed. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Now they know you're with me." "They already knew," Ike said, his gaze meeting hers. "They've known since the day I rode into this town, just like I knew they'd come for you." He paused, his stormy eyes locking onto hers. "Now tell me about the map." The directness of the question hit her like a physical blow. The careful dance was over. "It's not a map," she said, her voice barely audible. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the Bible. Her hands shook as she opened it to the separated page. "It's a list." Ike took the page. He stared at it, his face a mask of stone. He traced the names with his finger. Names of men long dead, names of men still living. His own name, her father's. "The Black Creek Gang," he said, the words tasting like ash. "There was a robbery, a federal gold shipment after the war. The gang took it, killed the guards, and vanished. They were supposed to be dead." "But they're not," Grace finished. "Vaughn is one of them, and he's hunting the rest." "No," Ike said, his eyes dark with a terrible secret. "He's not hunting them. He's silencing them. Because we weren't part of the gang." He looked at her, and the truth of it all finally came pouring out. "We were the guards who survived." The workshop felt like a tomb. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "We were Pinkerton agents," Ike said, his voice low, haunted. "Hired to guard that shipment. Your father, me, all the men on that list. The Black Creek Gang ambushed us. They were supposed to be a small-time outfit, but they were organized, brutal. They slaughtered almost everyone." He pointed to the scar on his eyebrow. "A souvenir from their leader. They left us for dead," he continued. "But a few of us survived. We made a pact to hunt them down one by one and recover the stolen gold. We called ourselves the Regulators." Grace's mind was reeling. Her father, a secret agent, a manhunter. "The gold was never found," Ike said. "The gang members scattered, took new names, became respectable citizens. Silas Vaughn, he was their second in command, a man named Jedediah Kane, the most vicious of them all." Now it all made sense. The debt was a lie. Vaughn wasn't after their farm. He was after the one thing that could bring him down. "The evidence," Grace whispered. "My father had proof of who they were." "And a map to the gold," Ike added. "We figured the leader must have kept a map. Your father was convinced he'd found its location. That's what he was looking for on your land. And that's what Vaughn thinks you have now." He looked from the list to her face, a new, desperate urgency in his eyes. "Grace, you have to think. Did your father give you anything else? A trinket? A locket? Did he say anything, a phrase, a riddle? Anything at all?" She shook her head, her mind a blank canvas of grief and shock. "Only. He told me to read from the Bible, the night before. He said to read Psalm 23. Ike grabbed the Bible from her, his movements sharp, frantic. He flipped to the psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." He read the words aloud, his brow furrowed. But they were just words. There was nothing hidden, no secret code. He slammed the Bible shut in frustration. "It has to be here." Suddenly, Grace remembered something else. The way her father had held the book. He wasn't just holding it. He was tracing the embossed pattern on the leather cover, a swirling design of vines and leaves. "The cover," she said, pointing. He kept touching the cover. Ike stared at the intricate design. It was beautiful, but meaningless. Just a standard decorative press. But then his carpenter's eye caught something. A flaw. A tiny, almost invisible irregularity in the pattern. A single leaf that was pressed deeper than the others. He ran his thumb over it. He pressed down. Nothing. He took out his pocket knife and, with infinite care, inserted the tip under the edge of the leaf. He pried. A section of the leather cover, no bigger than a silver dollar, lifted up. It wasn't leather at all. It was a thin metal plate, expertly tooled and stained to match the cover, and beneath it, nestled in a hollowed-out space, was a small, tightly folded piece of oilskin. The map. It was rough, drawn in her father's hand. It showed the creek on their land, a series of rock formations, and a single ancient cottonwood tree, marked with an X. But there was something else written at the bottom. The key is the cry of the eagle. "I know this place," Ike breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. "It's on the far side of your property, an area they call Eagle's Cry Canyon." He looked at Grace, and for the first time she saw the full weight of the 20-year-old war he'd been fighting. "This is it," he said. "This is the end of the road, for them or for us." But as they stared at the map, a shadow fell across the workshop door. Sheriff Miller stood there, his face grim. "Ike," the sheriff said, his hand resting on his gun, "I need to have a word with you. A federal marshal rode into town this morning. He's got a warrant." The sheriff didn't look at Grace. He looked straight at Ike. "A warrant for your arrest, for the murder of a Pinkerton agent named Daniel Guthrie." The air in the workshop turned to ice. "That's a lie," Grace gasped, stepping forward. "My father was murdered by Silas Vaughn." Sheriff Miller's gaze was hard, unyielding. "The marshal has a witness, Miss Guthrie, someone who saw Ike here riding away from your farm just after the gunshot." Ike didn't move. His face was a thundercloud. "Who's the witness?" "Man named Earl," the sheriff said. "Works for Vaughn." "Of course. It was a setup, a perfect airtight frame. Vaughn couldn't risk coming after Grace directly again, not with Ike protecting her. So he was using the law to remove the protector." "Sheriff, you know me," Ike said, his voice a low growl. "You know what kind of man Vaughn is." "I know you've got a past you don't talk about," Miller countered. "And I know a federal warrant when I see one. I'm sorry, Ike. You have to come with me." Grace saw the trap closing. With Ike in a cell, Vaughn's men could walk right in and take her. Take the map. She'd be next. "No," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She stood between Ike and the sheriff. "You're not taking him." "Stay out of this, miss," the sheriff warned. But Ike was already moving. It wasn't a sudden, violent action. It was a slow, deliberate turning of his head. He looked at the back door of the workshop. Then he looked at Grace. It was a message. Run. He knew he couldn't fight his way out of this. Not against the town sheriff and a U.S. Marshal. But he could create a diversion. "I'm not going to a cell, Miller," Ike said, his hand dropping casually toward his side. The sheriff drew his gun. "Don't be a fool, Ike." In that split second of distraction, Grace did the only thing she could. She grabbed the heaviest tool she could find, a large iron wrench, and hurled it at the main window of the workshop. The shattering glass was like a second gunshot. As the sheriff flinched, Grace bolted for the back door. She didn't look back. She heard a scuffle, a shout, but she didn't stop. She ran. She burst into the back alley, her lungs burning. She had the Bible, the map, and the list. She had the truth. But she was alone again. She didn't know the town, but Ike's lessons came back to her. Know your exits. She dodged behind a rain barrel, her mind racing. The livery stable. She needed a horse. But as she peered around the corner, she saw them. Vaughn's men. They weren't at the front of the shop. They were here, in the alley, waiting. They had anticipated this. They had known Ike wouldn't go quietly, that he would try to get her out. The entire arrest was a performance, a pincer move designed to separate her from Ike and leave her with nowhere to go. The alley was a dead end. She was trapped. One of the men saw her. He grinned, a predator's smile, and started walking toward her, pulling his gun. Nowhere left to run, little bird. Grace backed away, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was it. This was how it ended. Then she heard a sound from above. A whistle, sharp and low. She looked up. On the roof of the livery stable, silhouetted against the gray sky, a figure was kneeling. It was Ike. He hadn't been arrested. The scuffle, the shouts, it was all part of his plan. He had used her diversion not to fight, but to escape, to get ahead of them. He held a rifle in his hands, its barrel pointed not at the men, but at a thick rope holding a massive stack of hay in the stable's loft. His eyes met hers across the distance. He gave a single sharp nod. He fired. The rope snapped. A ton of hay thundered down into the alley, missing the men but completely blocking their path in an avalanche of dust and straw. "The creek!" Ike yelled, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Follow the creek north. Go!" Grace didn't hesitate. She scrambled over a pile of crates, burst out of the alley's other end, and ran for the edge of town, for the thin line of trees that marked the creek bed. Behind her, she heard shouting, cursing, and the sound of the marshal's whistle blowing frantically. The whole town was erupting. She was a fugitive. Ike was a fugitive, and they were both running for their lives toward a canyon named Eagle's Cry, with a secret that could get them killed or set them free. The game had changed. This wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about getting to the gold before Vaughn could. The chase was on. Grace ran until her lungs felt like they were on fire, her only guide the cold, fast-moving creek Ike had pointed her toward. She could hear the sounds of pursuit behind her, men on horseback, their shouts echoing through the trees. They were closing the distance. She risked a glance back and saw them, 3 riders breaking through the woods. They would be on her in minutes. She scrambled up a rocky embankment, her hands raw and bleeding. There was nowhere to hide. The terrain was opening up. A shot rang out and a chip of rock exploded next to her head. She screamed, stumbling forward, a fresh wave of terror propelling her. Then from the ridge above, another shot answered. It wasn't aimed at her. One of the riders cried out and clutched his shoulder, his horse rearing in panic. Ike! He was up there, a ghost in the rocks providing cover fire with the rifle. "Keep moving," his voice boomed across the small valley. "Don't stop." Grace didn't need to be told twice. She ran, fueled by adrenaline, her feet finding a rhythm on the uneven ground. She was no longer just a victim. She was a moving target in a deadly game of chess. And Ike was her guardian knight. Another shot from Ike's rifle sent the other riders scattering for cover. He was buying her time, but she knew it wouldn't last. The marshal and the sheriff would be organizing a full-blown posse. She followed the creek for what felt like miles, the landscape growing wilder, more rugged. The foothills were rising up to meet the mountains. Finally, she saw it, a narrow opening in the rocks, almost hidden by overgrown brush. The entrance to Eagle's Cry Canyon. She plunged into the narrow passage, the temperature dropping as the rock walls closed in around her. The canyon twisted and turned, a maze of stone and shadow. The sounds of the pursuit faded, muffled by the sheer rock. She was safe for the moment. She leaned against a cold canyon wall, gasping for breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She pulled out the map. She had to find the cottonwood tree. After a few minutes of rest, Ike appeared at the canyon entrance, moving with a silent, wolf-like grace. He was reloading his rifle as he walked. "They've stopped at the entrance," he said, his voice grim. "They won't follow us in. Not yet. They'll wait for the main posse." He looked at her, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "You did good." The simple praise steadied her nerves. "What now?" "Now we find that gold," he said, taking the map. He studied it, then looked up at the canyon walls. "The map says the key is the cry of the eagle. That's not just the name of the canyon." He pointed upwards. High on the canyon rim, a rock formation vaguely resembled a perched eagle. When the wind blows through that pass just right, it makes a sound like a screeching eagle. It's an old landmark. He looked back at the map. The X isn't the gold. The X is the viewpoint. We need to get to that cottonwood and wait. Wait for what? For the sun, he said, pointing to a small drawing on the corner of the map she hadn't noticed before. A sun with lines radiating from it. This isn't just a map. It's a key that only works at a certain time of day. They found the ancient cottonwood tree an hour later, nestled on a high ledge overlooking the canyon floor. From there, they could see the entrance and the posse gathering below. There had to be 20 men now. They were trapped. Their only way out was blocked. They're settling in for a siege, Ike said, watching the men make camp. They think they have us cornered. Don't they? Grace asked, her hope beginning to fade. Your father was a smart man, Ike replied. He wouldn't have made a map that led to a dead end. There's another way out. The gold is the way out. As the afternoon sun began to sink towards the western ridge, they waited. The tension was unbearable. Then it happened. The sun aligned perfectly with a narrow slit in the canyon wall opposite them. A single brilliant beam of light shot across the canyon like a spear, and it struck the rock face just below the eagle formation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as the sunbeam hit a specific spot, a section of the rock seemed to glow. It was a patch of quartz, a vein of mica, that caught the light and reflected it downwards. The reflected beam landed on the canyon floor, illuminating a patch of ground that looked no different from any other. That's it, Ike breathed, but their triumph was short-lived. A shout echoed up from the canyon floor. There! Up there! I see 'em! The posse had seen them on the ledge. A volley of rifle fire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. Get down! Ike yelled, pulling Grace behind the trunk of the cottonwood. They were pinned down. The spot was 100 feet below them, and there was no way to get to it without being shot to pieces. Vaughn had them. He didn't need the map anymore. He just needed to wait until they were dead or surrendered, and then he could find the gold at his leisure. Grace looked at the spot on the canyon floor, her mind racing. They had the location, but they couldn't reach it. It was a cruel, final irony. Then she remembered the words on the map. The key is the cry of the eagle. It wasn't just about the wind. It was a clue. Ike, she said, her voice urgent. An eagle's cry. It's a signal, a warning. What if it's not about the wind at all? She looked at the posse below. They were spreading out, taking up positions to keep them trapped. What if the map is a fake? She whispered, a wild idea forming in her mind. Ike frowned. What are you talking about? It led us right here. No, she insisted. It led us here, out in the open, a perfect trap. My father knew Vaughn might get the map eventually. He wouldn't have made it that simple. He was leading them on a wild goose chase. Her eyes darted around their position on the ledge, the ancient cottonwood tree, the rock wall behind them. It seemed solid, but her father had been meticulous. A man who could hide a secret compartment in a Bible could hide one anywhere. She ran her hands over the rock face behind the tree, searching for any sign of a seam, a crack, anything out of place. The posse's bullets were still peppering the rocks around them. Grace, what are you doing? The map is a decoy, she said, her voice filled with desperate conviction. The X doesn't mark the viewpoint. It marks the treasure. Her fingers found it. A loose rock, no different from the others, but it shifted slightly under her touch. She pulled at it. It came free, revealing a dark, square opening behind it. A cavity dug into the rock. Ike stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. Grace reached inside. Her hand closed around not a bag of gold, but a heavy iron lockbox. She pulled it out. It was old, rusted, but solid. He left it here, Ike whispered in awe. All these years. This was it, the proof, the evidence, everything. But as they stared at the box, a new voice echoed up from below, a voice that froze Grace's blood in her veins. Calloway! It was Vaughn. He was riding out in front of the posse holding a white flag. You have something that belongs to me. Send the girl down with the box and I'll let you walk away. Ike let out a grim laugh. He's a liar. I know, Grace said. She looked at the box, then at the sheer drop to the canyon floor, then at the blocked entrance. They had the prize, but they were still in the cage. He won't let either of us leave here alive, Ike said, his face grim. He has to silence us for good. Suddenly, Ike's expression changed. He looked at the lockbox, then at the narrow canyon pass, and a reckless, dangerous idea began to form in his eyes. Maybe we don't have to leave the way we came in, he said. He grabbed the heavy iron box from Grace. Give me the list. All of it. She handed him the papers from the Bible. He stuffed them inside his shirt. He turned to her, his stormy eyes boring into hers. Trust me? She had trusted him with her life. She nodded. Always. Good, he said. Then he stood up in full view of the posse below and held the lockbox high above his head. Vaughn, he roared, his voice echoing through the canyon. You want it? Come and get it. And then he did the unthinkable. He turned and hurled the heavy iron box as far as he could, not down into the canyon, but back, deeper into the rocky maze behind them. For a moment there was stunned silence from the posse below. Then Vaughn screamed in fury. After him! He's getting away! The siege was broken. The posse plunged into the canyon entrance in a chaotic rush, desperate to follow the sound of the crashing box and get to the treasure. They were no longer a firing line. They were a stampede, and they had just abandoned the only exit. Now, Ike said, grabbing Grace's hand, we run. They didn't run back into the canyon. They ran forward, toward the ledge, toward the 100-foot drop. Ike, what are you doing? Grace cried. He pointed to the side of the ledge to a place hidden from below by a rock outcropping. A thick rope, old and weathered but still strong, was tied to the base of the cottonwood tree, its other end trailing down into the darkness. Your father had an escape plan, Ike said with a grim smile. He just didn't tell me about it. The real treasure wasn't the gold. It was the way out. They scrambled down the rope, the rocks tearing at their hands, the shouts of the confused posse echoing below them. They landed on a lower ledge, hidden in shadow, just as Vaughn and his men reached the cottonwood tree far above. They heard Vaughn's enraged scream as he realized he'd been tricked. The lockbox was a decoy. From the lower ledge, a narrow, winding path, a goat trail barely visible, led them down, down, down toward the canyon floor and away from the trap. As they reached the bottom, panting and bruised, Ike paused and pulled the papers from his shirt. It was never about the gold, was it? Grace asked. No, Ike said, holding up the list of names. It was about this. Justice. They had the proof. They had the witness statements her father had collected. They had Vaughn's real name and his crimes. And now they had their freedom. They slipped out of the canyon as dusk fell, leaving Vaughn and his men trapped in the maze of their own greed. The hunt was over. The trial would begin. They didn't go back to Whispering Pines. They rode east. With the evidence from the lockbox, her father's meticulously kept journal, sworn affidavits from other regulators, and a detailed map of the stolen gold's location, they went straight to the territorial capital in Cheyenne. The U.S. Marshal who had tried to arrest Ike was disgraced. It turned out he was on Vaughn's payroll. The trial of Jedediah Kane, a.k.a. Silas Vaughn, was the biggest event the Wyoming Territory had ever seen. Grace, poised and unwavering, took the stand. She told them everything, her father's words coming to life through her. Ike stood beside her the whole time. Vaughn was convicted. His empire, built on lies and blood, crumbled to dust. The federal government recovered the gold, and the names of the murdered Pinkerton agents were finally cleared. The land that Vaughn had stolen, including Grace's family farm, was returned to its rightful owners. Weeks later, Grace stood on the porch of the home she thought she'd lost forever. The late afternoon sun warmed her face. It was over. Ike rode up, leading 2 horses. He swung down from the saddle, his familiar, quiet presence a comfort she had come to rely on more than she realized. "The carpenters are ready to start rebuilding the barn tomorrow," he said. "Our barn," she corrected him softly. He smiled, that rare, honest smile that transformed his face. "Our barn." They stood in silence for a moment, the vast, peaceful plains stretching out before them. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest. "I came to Whispering Pines to build a quiet life," Ike said, his voice thoughtful. "To leave the fighting behind." "And you found me," Grace finished, "and the biggest fight of your life." "I did," he said, turning to face her. His stormy eyes were clear now, the shadows gone. "And I wouldn't change a thing." He took a step closer. "Grace, I know you need time to heal, to rebuild, but I need to tell you, this farm, this land, it doesn't feel like home without you in it." Her heart, which she had guarded so fiercely, felt like it was finally truly safe. "I've been running for so long," she whispered, her own tears surprising her. I think I'm finally ready to stop." He reached out, his calloused fingers gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "I'm not much of a farmer," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm a damn good builder. And I'd like to build a life here. With you." She didn't need any more words. She stepped into his arms, into the strength and safety she had found in the most unlikely of saviors. It wasn't a whirlwind romance born of passion, but something stronger, quieter, forged in fire and truth. It was a partnership, a homecoming. As the sun set, casting long shadows across their land, Grace knew the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The story of the woman who lost everything, the secret soldier who fought for justice, and the love that rebuilt their world, board by steady board. The legacy of the Black Creek Gang faded into whispered legend, but the story of Grace Guthrie and Ike Calloway became a cornerstone of Whispering Pines. They rebuilt the farm into the most prosperous in the valley. The house echoed with the laughter of children, and the workshop Ike built next to the barn was always filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood. They proved that even in a land forged by violence and greed, true strength came from courage, and the most valuable treasure wasn't buried gold, but the home you build in someone's heart. If you were captivated by this story of hidden secrets and frontier justice, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible tales we have coming your way.